So welcome back to another video, and today I'm going to talk about the ZF. Specifically, it's going to be quite a short video. It's not a full review or anything like that. It's just that I've had quite a few emails and queries and questions about the ZF. How do I set it up? And I've seen loads of stuff on Facebook about and people kind of not exactly complaining, but saying that Nikon have not done quite a good a job as they could have done. And one of the big things that people talk about is the ISO button, the ISO dial. You have to go into the menu to change auto ISO, turn off auto ISO and that kind of thing, which is really very inconvenient. And for the first couple of weddings, I had that problem. But anyway, quite a while ago I found a solution to that which actually works absolutely brilliantly. And in fact, I'm kind of thinking that Nikon intended this to be the way it should be done all along, but they just don't tell anyone. It's weird. But anyway, I'm going to show you that. I will show you how I've set up the buttons and bits and bobs and focus and all that for weddings, and in fact it works for pretty well everything. And talk about the ISO and auto ISO and how I shoot this in manual, because this really is the first camera, and I'm talking, I've had the D700, 600, 850, 810, and I've still got the D780 and the D700 and a DF. So I've had lots of cameras, and I've never really shot much in manual. I've pretty well almost always used aperture priority, certainly for weddings, because it just, I don't know, I've just never got particularly comfortable with manual exposure. However, this guy, it does work, and the last two weddings I have used probably 60-70% of the time has been manual exposure. Let's dive into it. Okay, so the first thing, buttons. Let's deal with the buttons. This button here, okay, movie record button. I hope you can see this. I have assigned to zoom because I also use, not only do I use manual exposure a lot, but also manual focus. This, by the way, is the 51.4 Z lens. If you've seen quite a few of my videos from a while back when I had the Z8 and the Z6 II, I've still got the Z6 II. Last year I had a whole range of 1.8S Z mount lenses. I just couldn't fall in love with them. I just did not like the character. They were too sharp, too clinical, lacked character. Just didn't like them at all. This guy, well, I've only had this 10 days or so. Haven't done a wedding with it yet. Got one at the weekend, and it's going to replace my normal, have I got it on there? Anyway, my normal 58 1.4 F mount on the FTZ adapter, which has been my main kind of lens that I've used at weddings. So this 50 is going to get a workout at the weekend, and keep a watch out for the video on that to see how I think it compares to the 58 1.4, which for me is my most ever favourite lens. It's absolutely gorgeous character. I'm hoping this comes somewhere close, because as you can see, there's quite a bit of difference. Hope you can see quite a bit of difference in size there. Right, onto the buttons. So zoom, and like most Nikons, you don't need to have a switch on the side, which is fortunate, because this hasn't got a switch on the side to switch from autofocus to manual focus like the S-line lenses have got. But if you set the camera so that the shutter does not autofocus, you rely on the back button focus for focusing, come on to that shortly, then you can just tweak the focus ring at any point to get manual focus. Instantly it pops up with the focus peaking, which most of the time, even shooting at 1.4, most of the time is good enough. You don't need to zoom in, I find. If you want to get absolutely spot on, then a quick press the button, let me show you. We'll get you zoomed in, so a quick press and we zoom in, quick press and we zoom out. So it makes focusing very, very easy indeed. So that covers the focusing. The back button focus, now the focus mode that I use, let me just go into the eye menu and let's get a bit closer. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see this without changing the exposure, but anyway, up here we've got 3D tracking. Put the glasses on, and if I go into the 3D tracking, then you can see I've got 3D as the AF area mode, and down at the bottom you've got the subject detection options, and I've got people selected. Now I don't always want that, so occasionally I do find that I need to go in and turn that off, but a much quicker option is manually focus. Just focus. If there's, oops, I can't show you. Oh yes, I can. Maybe I can. If there's a face in the frame, then it will. Let me move. I don't know if you can see. I hope you can. If I move the focus box right over to the right hand side, it hasn't come up with. No. It's a bit too, yes it has, it just came up with it then. Yeah, right. So if I now hit manual, the zoom button, it didn't quite do it. Sorry, it's a bit too dark in here. But normally if there's a face in the frame and you hit the zoom button, it'll zoom in on that face on the eye. And it's brilliant in normal. I've got the window blocked out because the sun's out and it's too bright. Normally works absolutely fantastically. So there's no need to like turn off the tracking or anything like that. You can simply manually focus. And as I say, it's so good that I find I now use manual focus probably 60% of the time at a wedding. The other buttons, the only other button I've really assigned is the display button. Now is the focus, the exposure lock button, because if I'm using aperture priority, which I've got it set on at the moment, then I can get the focus right. Sorry, I can get the exposure right, hit that button, and it's going to stay there for as many shots as I want until I hit it again. That I find quite useful if I'm using aperture priority, which typically I would use. Maybe we're in a dark church and I'm shooting away and I'd be in manual exposure, and then we're going to start, I'm going to get the bride walking up the aisle, bride and groom walking up the aisle, and then walking out the door, and they're going to be walking out into bright sunlight. I can't be fiddling, and I want to get shots of them coming up the aisle and then walking out the door, and I want to follow them out into the bright sunshine. Then I would definitely use aperture priority. In the church, I would be using manual exposure. Once we've got outside and I've got, 15-20 shots done, and they've got the champagne, I've got those critical shots that I want to get, then I should go back to manual exposure, set it up for outside, and then I'm okay to shoot outside. So let's get on to the auto exposure, the elephant in the room. So you don't need to ever go into the menu to change to your auto ISO settings, and in fact Nikon have actually implemented this really well. If only they have told us. So what I've done is a front button, you can see here, I think it's called the function 1 button. I've assigned that to ISO. So if we go into the menu, again, I hope you can see this, I'm going to controls for shooting, then you can see that button there is set to ISO, and that's it. That's all you need to do. What this then means is if I go to in fact in aperture priority, say it wouldn't happen outside, say I'm inside but for some reason I want to get some fast shots. I want the shutter speed up to 500th of a second or something like that. At the moment I've got the auto ISO on and the minimum ISO is 100 and the maximum I think is 12,500 or 25,800, I'm not sure. What I can do to force that speed up is to increase the ISO. So if I just press that front button, which you can't see me doing, but I'm pressing it with that finger, and spin the back dial, then we've got 100 comes up at the moment. If I spin that dial, I can just whack that up to, let's say, 2000, and now my shutter speed is 1,000th of a second. So in like 1 second, 1.5 seconds, I can increase the shutter speed without coming out of aperture priority, just by pushing up the ISO to such an extent that the speed is pushed up to the sort of speed I want to capture this shot. So you don't need to touch the top dial. The top dial, by the way, is just on C, and the speed dial is on 1/3 of a stop, 1/3 step, sorry. Press the front dial again, and I'll go back down to 100 for the ISO. Okay. Also, if I press that front button and now use the front dial, which is normally set for the aperture, then I turn off auto ISO, and I'm now just fixed on 100 ISO. And as you can see, the speed now has dropped down to a 25th of a second, 8th of a second, 10th of a second. It's almost manual, except the camera is deciding the speed to get the correct exposure. If I increase the ISO to something more sensible for indoors with the window blanked out, say 4,000 ISO, and so every shot I take is going to be 4,000 ISO, we're now up to 400th of a second, 300, 500, so we're up to a sensible speed, and it will get the correct exposure by adjusting the speed, not adjusting the ISO, obviously. Okay, if we now go, let me put that back onto auto ISO, and we go back down to as it was, to 100 ISO there. If I now go to manual, just flick the switch. Obviously, I've got full control of everything. I've got the aperture on the front dial. If I don't press any buttons, I change from 1.4 up to 2.5, 5.6. And can I digress at this point? Nikon Z lens 1.4, they've put a ring. You've got the focus ring, obviously at the front, and you've got this second ring, which the 1.8 S lenses don't have. So that is a great addition. Or it would be. What the hell are Nikon thinking of it? I have no idea. Why the hell didn't they make that a proper aperture ring? Put some numbers on it, make it click, put a switch on so you can declick it if you want to do video. I just don't understand Nikon. I don't know what planet they're on. Since they've gone mirrorless, they've kind of lost the plot. They've gone more content creator than photographer. You know, declicked, because when you go into the menu, you can set that ring to anything you want. You can set it to ISO and various other things. But the obvious one is to set it to aperture, to change the aperture. But without the clicks, you can just touch that inadvertently and you've got no idea what's happening. And it's absolutely stupid. No idea why Nikon didn't make it a proper lens, proper photographer's lens. Because it's obviously aimed more at photographers who want some character back in their photos rather than the super sharp 1.8 S lenses. Just don't understand it. I digress, so sorry. So anyway, so front dial, manual exposure, obviously aperture, and let's go to F4. Rear dial, speed, 100, 200, 1,000, 2,500, whatever, okay. ISO is on auto. So if I decide, as I mentioned earlier, we're indoors, I want to have a higher shutter speed for some reason, some sort of action happening, I can just flick from aperture priority to manual. I can set the speed to 1,000th of a second. I'm on auto ISO, and it will adjust the ISO to give me correct exposure. In this case, 25,600. Maybe reel down a bit. 400th. It is dark in here, isn't it? Right. But I can also press that front function button, turn auto ISO off, and we're now at 100 ISO. I can use the back dial to dial up the ISO to get the exposure I want. We've got the scale on the side to tell me whether I'm in where I am regarding exposure, and obviously you can set that to be the whole screen, multi, center weighted, spot linked to the focus point, whatever you want. I always use spot locked to the focus point because I want what I'm focusing on to be correctly exposed, so that's the way I always do it. So that is the way I have this guy set up for weddings, and it really does work well. And my first choice, my sequence of deciding what settings to use when I get to a situation, say I walk into the bride's prep, first thing I want to do, what am I going to photograph? Do I want to use 1.4, 5.6? Do I want to get everything in focus, f11? So first thing, choose the aperture. Next thing, probably the speed. I wouldn't want to photograph people much below 125th of a second, so I set that to 125th of a second. Quite often I will use auto ISO, so I turn on auto ISO, and that's it's dark in here, it's coming up with 25,600, but it is coming up with something that looks pretty much like the correct exposure. If I dropped, for some reason, the exposure down, say I'm photographing the details and it's really dark, then I could drop down to maybe a 40th of a second, and I would drop down to wide open 1.4. Obviously, if I've got auto ISO turned on and the camera's deciding, then I've also got the exposure compensation dial that if I decide, well, I want to get rid of those highlights sort of in the background, and I'll just drop the exposure down using the exposure compensation, and that will also work. So Nikon, whilst they did apparently, and I agreed, they apparently seem to have screwed things up. Actually, if you set it up like that, it works better than any camera that I've had from Nikon ever. So I hope you found that useful. Give it a try, play with it, and really, if you're ever going to use manual focusing and manual exposure, you are not ever going to get a better camera to do it with than this, I don't think. I mean, let me just digress. Again, my Leica, which everyone raves about, you know, with the dials on top and so on. I'll tell you what, this is a complete pain to use compared to the ZF. The ISO dial is a complete joke. You've got to do that. You can't really spin it while you're looking through the viewfinder. It just doesn't spin very easily. You've got to sort of twist it with the speed dial. It's okay, but I end up using aperture priority the whole time on this. I cannot, it's just not practical for me. I don't find I can use manual exposure on this at all, but there we go. That's just, so that's comparing the ZF to something like a Leica. It's better from that point of view. In fact, from most points of view actually. Right, thanks for watching.